My name is Caroline Miller. I'm 61 years old, and my story begins on the afternoon my own son locked me out of the home I had built with my own hands. I stood at the front porch, the same porch where I had once rocked him to sleep in my arms, and found a folded letter taped to the door. My heart sank before I even opened it. Something told me this wasn't going to be good. And then I read the words that shattered me. Mom, this isn't your house anymore. Don't come back. White right pointing backhand index before I tell you what happened next. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. I stared at the letter for a long moment, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. My fingers trembled against the paper, and I had to hold onto the railing just to keep myself steady. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that made even the sound of my breath feel too loud. I kept asking myself if this was a joke, some cruel prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. My son, Daniel, had been distant for months. Still, I never imagined he'd go this far. I knocked on the door 3 times, firm but not angry. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence, and then I heard footsteps on the other side. The door creaked open just enough for me to see his face. My Daniel, my only child. He looked tired, older than his 32 years, and his jaw tightened as if he had been preparing for this confrontation all along. Daniel, I whispered, clutching the letter in my hand. What is this? Tell me this isn't real. He glanced at the paper but didn't reach for it. Instead, he shook his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. It's real, Mom. The house. It doesn't belong to you anymore. I signed it over. The words cut through me like ice. Signed it over? To who? Why would you even? Before I could finish, a woman's voice called out from inside. His wife. Daniel, don't drag this out. She doesn't live here anymore. Close the door. The tone in her voice was sharp, impatient, almost commanding. My heart sank even lower. I had never fully trusted her, though I kept my mouth shut for Daniel's sake. But in that moment, I knew she was at the center of this. I reached for his arm, gently. Son, you don't understand what you're saying. This is the home your father and I bought. Every inch of it, your first steps in that hallway, your birthday parties in that yard. You can't just erase all of that. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Doubt? I couldn't tell. But then his jaw tightened again, and he stepped back. It's done. Please don't make this harder than it already is. And then, just like that, the door closed. Not slammed, not shoved, just slowly, firmly, closed. I stood there, staring at the wood grain of the door as if it might open again if I waited long enough. But it didn't. Behind it, I could hear muffled voices, hers rising, his quieter, defensive. And me? I just stood there, frozen on the porch that used to be mine. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the driveway. I remember the smell of fresh-cut grass from the neighbor's yard, the hum of a lawnmower in the distance, and the faint laughter of children playing down the street. Normal sounds. Everyday life. And yet, my world had just been turned upside down. I walked down the steps slowly, each footfall heavier than the last. My car was parked by the curb, and I sat inside it with the letter still clutched in my hand. I must have read it 10 times, searching for some clue, some hidden line that explained why. But all it said, over and over, was that I wasn't welcome anymore. As the minutes passed, anger began to rise where sorrow had been. How could he do this? How could my own son betray me like this? I thought about all the years I had worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sacrificed so he could have a better life. I thought about the nights I stayed up when he had the flu, the mornings I cheered at his baseball games, the days I clapped proudly as he crossed stage after stage. Every memory felt like a knife twisting deeper. I started the car, but I didn't drive. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the front of the house. I remembered painting those shutters navy blue with his father one summer afternoon. I remembered planting those rose bushes by the porch because Daniel loved their smell when he was a boy. That house wasn't just walls and windows, It was a life, a history, a story written with my blood and sweat. And now, it was being stolen from me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the front curtain shifted, and I saw her face. His wife. She was watching me through the window, her arms crossed, her expression cold. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. If anything, she smirked. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't just Daniel's decision. No, this was her plan, and he was caught in the middle. I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, tears burning hot down my cheeks. The further I got from the house, the emptier I felt, like I was leaving behind not just a home but a piece of my soul. Still, somewhere deep inside, another feeling began to stay. A quiet, steady determination. Because if Daniel thought I would just walk away, he didn't know me at all. That day, on that porch, my son shut me out. But he also lit a fire inside me. And though I didn't know exactly how yet, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. When my son's words slammed the door of my own house in my face, I didn't argue, I didn't beg, and I didn't scream. I simply walked down the front steps with my hands shaking, my eyes fixed on the cracked sidewalk that had carried me in and out of that home for decades. My body felt like it had turned to stone, but my mind, it wouldn't stay still. Something inside me shifted that day, and while my heart was bruised beyond recognition, a small spark of defiance began to flicker in the dark. I didn't know what to do just yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not going to let them strip me of everything I had built without a fight. That night, I sat in my car parked at the far end of the grocery store lot. I couldn't bring myself to drive anywhere else. The hum of cars coming and going gave me a kind of cover, like I wasn't entirely alone even though I'd never felt more abandoned. I opened the glove box and pulled out an old spiral notebook I kept for grocery lists and reminders. My hands were unsteady as I wrote down one sentence, over and over, like a chant. They cannot take what is mine. By the time I stopped, the words filled half the page, crooked and angry, but each line gave me a strange sense of control. The next morning, I went to the library. It wasn't just a place for books anymore. It was the only space where I could think without anyone watching me. I sat at a computer, typed property rights and family disputes into the search bar, and hit enter. The results felt overwhelming, but I forced myself to click and read, one by one. Some articles made me feel helpless, talking about loopholes and transfers of ownership, but then I found something that made me lean forward, fraudulent conveyance. It was a legal term, but in plain English, it meant what I suspected. If someone tried to transfer property under dishonest circumstances, it could be challenged. My pulse quickened. I printed the article, folded it, and tucked it into my purse like it was gold. Still, I knew knowledge on paper wasn't enough. I needed proof. I drove back to the neighborhood, parking a few blocks away so no one would see me. My house looked the same from the outside, same white paint, same uneven gutters, but it felt foreign, like a stranger's space. I noticed something I hadn't before. The blinds in the front room were pulled all the way down, even though I had always kept them open for the morning sun. I pulled out my phone and took pictures, zooming in on the changes. It felt strange, sneaky, but also necessary. Later that afternoon, I called a woman named Linda, a longtime neighbor who had always been kind to me. I asked her, carefully, if she'd seen anyone going in or out of my house since yesterday. Her voice dropped low, almost like she was whispering. I saw a couple of people moving things in late last night. They weren't from around here. My chest tightened. Strangers were already inside my walls, touching the furniture I had bought, walking on the floors I had scrubbed. I thanked her, promised not to involve her directly, but inside I made a silent vow. They would regret rushing into what wasn't theirs. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's face, his jaw stiff, his eyes avoiding mine as he told me I couldn't come back. Part of me wanted to crumble under the weight of that betrayal. But another part of me, the part that had worked 2 jobs to keep that roof over our heads when he was a boy, whispered that tears wouldn't solve this. I pulled out the notebook again, flipped to a new page, and began writing lists. Not just emotions this time, but steps. Small, deliberate steps. The first list was about allies. Who could I trust? Who might stand by me? Not out of pity, but because they believed in fairness. I wrote down 3 names. Linda, for her watchful eyes. My sister Carol, though she lived 2 towns over, had always been protective of me. And finally, Pastor Williams, who had known our family for years and had a knack for reading through lies. The second list was about evidence. Old utility bills in my name, photographs of the house through the years, even the faded deed I had tucked in a safe box at the bank. Every item became a puzzle piece, and though the picture wasn't clear yet, I could feel it forming. But it wasn't just about papers and names. I needed to steady myself emotionally. I remembered something my grandmother used to say when I was a girl. Quiet waters run deep, and that's where strength is born. So instead of storming into the house, instead of confronting my son in front of his wife and her family, I chose silence. I smiled to myself in the dark, though no one could see it. Silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. The following morning, I dressed carefully, not in anything new or flashy, but in the navy blue coat I wore to serious places. I drove to the courthouse. My stomach twisted as I walked inside, but I forced myself to the clerk's office. When I asked about property records, the woman behind the counter slid a form toward me. I filled it out with a steady hand, though my heart was racing. Within minutes, I was holding copies of recent filings connected to my address. And there it was, my son's signature. My breath caught in my throat as I traced the lines of his handwriting with my finger. He had signed over the deed, but not to me, not even to his wife directly. It was in the names of her cousins, people I had never met. My vision blurred, not from tears this time, but from a wave of sharp, cold clarity. They had moved fast, but so could I. That evening, I sat in Carol's kitchen, the papers spread out between us. She poured me coffee, her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't right, Anna. Not by any measure. He had no right. I nodded, my jaw set. Her anger fueled mine, but I kept my voice even. Then I'll make it right. Quietly, carefully, but I'll make it right. As the night wore on, we talked about possible lawyers, about costs, about the long road ahead. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew my son might see me as the enemy from this point on. But as I folded the papers back into my purse, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Control. The plan wasn't complete yet, not by a long shot. But the seed had been planted. And seeds, when given time and patience, grow roots stronger than anyone can see. The papers crinkled softly inside my purse as I left Carol's house that night, the weight of them pressing against my side like a secret I wasn't ready to speak aloud. I drove home slowly, headlights slicing through the quiet streets, my hands tight on the wheel. Every tane of the tires seemed to drum the same thought into me. They thought it was over. My son, his wife, her family, they believed they had tied everything neatly with a bow. But I knew that bow would unravel the moment I pulled the right string. In the days that followed, I stayed quiet. That was the hardest part, swallowing every urge to march up to the front door of my own house and demand answers. But restraint was my only weapon right now. If I gave in to emotion, I would lose. So instead, I carried on like a ghost moving through my own town. People greeted me at the market, asked how I was doing, and I offered small smiles, murmured polite replies. No one saw the storm brewing under my calm exterior. Meanwhile, I began to notice signs that they were preparing for something. It started small, deliveries to the house, boxes carried inside by unfamiliar faces, the faint sound of music drifting from behind closed windows. I'd sit parked a block away, engine off, just listening. Laughter spilled out sometimes, muffled but unmistakable. My son's voice among them, relaxed, almost carefree, as if the woman who raised him was already a forgotten chapter. On Thursday afternoon, I stopped by the corner cafe where Linda often spent her mornings. She waved me over with that same gentle warmth she'd always shown me. As I sat across from her, she leaned in. "They are planning something big," she whispered, as if the walls themselves might be listening. I overheard his wife on the phone, talking about a celebration, maybe this weekend. My stomach tightened. A celebration. The word tasted bitter, like vinegar. They hadn't even let the dust settle before planning a gathering, raising glasses under the roof I had held together with my bare hands. I forced a smile, nodding at Linda as though it were a piece of idle gossip, but inside, a new resolve cemented itself. If they were preparing for a celebration, I would prepare for the calm before it. That night, I went walking. The air was cool, autumn leaves crunching under my shoes as the streetlights flickered to life. I stopped outside a hardware store, staring at the reflection of my own face in the glass. Tired eyes, but not broken. I stepped inside and bought a simple lockbox, the kind that could be tucked away under a bed or slid onto a closet shelf. Back at Carol's, I filled it with the documents I had gathered so far, utility bills, old photographs, and the courthouse copies. As I closed the lid, turning the key, it felt like sealing part of myself into steel. Days passed with an uneasy stillness, like the pause before a storm breaks. I tried to keep my mind busy. I baked bread one afternoon, the smell filling Carol's kitchen, reminding me of better years when my son was small and would steal slices before the loaf had cooled. But even that memory, sweet as it was, cut deep now. I pushed it aside, focusing instead on kneading the dough, pressing out every ounce of frustration into its surface. On Saturday morning, Carol noticed me staring out her window, my coffee cooling untouched in my hands. "You're too quiet," she said softly. I turned to her, managing a faint smile. "Quiet is better than reckless." She didn't press further, though I could see worry written across her face. By noon, Linda called. Her voice held urgency. "They are decorating. String lights, flowers, like it's a wedding." I've never seen so many people going in and out. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. My house, my walls, their stage. For a moment, anger threatened to spill out, but I steadied my breath. "Thank you, Linda," I said. "You've done more than enough." After hanging up, I sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of traffic. I imagined the house lit up, laughter echoing off the walls, glasses clinking in a toast I wasn't invited to. The image burned into me, but rather than weakening my resolve, it sharpened it. Let them celebrate, I thought. Let them dance and smile under false security. That evening, I walked past the house once more. From across the street, I could see the glow of lanterns strung across the porch, their light spilling onto the lawn. I stayed in the shadows, unnoticed, as music floated out, soft, cheerful, oblivious to the storm pressing closer. I saw my son through the window, his hand on his wife's back as he spoke to guests. He looked older, more hardened than the boy I remembered, but for a fleeting moment, his laugh carried me back to when he was 12 and would shed a joke over burnt pancakes. My chest ached, but I did not move closer. Instead, I stood rooted, watching, until the cool night air wrapped around me like armor. My pulse steadied. My mind cleared. This wasn't my moment to act. It was my moment to gather strength, to watch, to let them believe the story was theirs. As I turned to leave, a gust of wind swept through the street, rattling the leaves at my feet. I tucked my coat tighter around me, the golden glow of the house fading behind me. They thought tomorrow would bring them triumph. But tonight, in this quiet, I found something stronger than anger. I found patience. And patience, I knew, was the sharpest blade of all. The wind still carried the faint memory of last night's lanterns as I walked down the same street the next morning. My coat pulled tight, I kept to the far side of the road, blending with the shadows of the maples lining the block. From a distance, the house stood there like a proud stranger, dressed in ribbons of light, but quieter now, as though it had shed its mask of celebration. Then I saw them, 3 cars parked at crooked angles in the driveway, trunks open, doors left ajar, cardboard boxes, some taped shut, Others collapsed and leaning, were stacked against the porch railings. People moved in and out with a steady rhythm, carrying bundles, laughing between themselves, their breath visible in the cool morning air. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. They weren't just celebrating anymore. They were moving. A box toppled from someone's arms as I watched. Papers spilled across the lawn, fluttering like startled birds. A woman bent down to gather them. My daughter-in-law. She smoothed the pages carelessly, cramming them back inside before disappearing through the front door again. My throat tightened at the sight. Those could have been mine. Old records, letters, bills with my handwriting. Every corner of that house still bore my fingerprints, and now strangers were touching what had once been private. I stood there too long, and Linda's voice startled me when she appeared at my side. "You shouldn't be out here," she whispered, clutching a grocery bag to her chest. I didn't look at her. "Boxes," I said quietly, as though naming them gave me control. "They are moving my things." Linda shifted uncomfortably, lowering her gaze. "I heard them talking yesterday. Something about clearing out the past, making room for what's theirs now." The word struck me harder than I expected. Clearing out the past. As if I were nothing more than dust to be swept aside. I straightened, squaring my shoulders. "Not all of it is theirs to take." Linda touched my arm, her grip hesitant. "Please, don't do anything rash." I pulled away gently, eyes fixed on the figures crossing my porch. "I won't," I said, though the promise tasted like a lie. I left her there and walked slowly around the block, careful not to draw attention. By the time I circled back, another car had arrived, its trunk full of folded clothes, plastic bins, and kitchenware. A man I didn't recognize carried in a box labeled Fragile in red marker. I narrowed my eyes. Fragile. That word belonged to me now, not to their things. Across the street, I sat down on the low wall of an abandoned property, hands folded tightly in my lap. From this vantage point, I could observe without being seen. My son emerged then, carrying a box so heavy he leaned into it, his face strained. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation in the way he paused at the door, shifting the weight against his hip. Did he remember me then? Remember the woman who once lifted furniture beside him when money was too tight for movers? The thought flickered, then died as he stepped inside without looking back. Hours passed, and the activity never slowed. Neighbors stopped by, offering congratulations, even lending a hand. Some brought casseroles, others flowers. I felt invisible, like a ghost pressed against glass, watching a play where I had been written out of the script. By late afternoon, the boxes piled high in the garage, spilling into the driveway. I noticed familiar patterns, my floral dishes stacked in a bin, my old lamp jutting from a cardboard edge, its cord dangling lifelessly. Each glimpse was a small stab, but none so deep as when I saw them drag out my rocking chair. The chair I had nursed my son in, the one that had creaked under the weight of countless late nights. They laughed as they maneuvered it through the door, nearly dropping it on the porch step. My heart clenched so hard I had to grip the stone wall to steady myself. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. Not loud sobs, just a quiet stream that burned against the cold air. I wiped them quickly, unwilling to give myself the release they didn't deserve. Toward evening, Carol joined me. She approached with cautious steps, sitting beside me without speaking at first. We watched together as the last load of boxes was carried inside, the porch finally clear. "They're settling in for good," she murmured, almost to herself. I swallowed hard. "For now." She turned her head, searching my face. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. My gaze stayed fixed on the house, the golden glow from the windows spilling into the dark. The smell of roasted food drifted faintly, carried by the breeze, mingling with laughter from inside. It was the kind of sound that once belonged to me. Now it grated like glass underfoot. Carol sighed, wrapping her scarf tighter around her neck. "You can't keep watching them like this. It'll break you." Her words lingered, heavy and well-meaning, but they couldn't touch the fire that had already taken root in me. Watching didn't break me, it strengthened me. Every box they carried, every dish they stacked, every light they strung only carved my resolve sharper. As the evening deepened, the street emptied. The cars were gone, the guests dispersed, the laughter softened into muffled chatter inside. I stood, brushing dirt from my coat. Carol looked up at me. "Where are you going?" "Home," I said simply. Her brows knit. "That's not your home anymore." I met her eyes, steady and unwavering. "It still knows my name." With that, I walked away, leaving Carol in silence. My footsteps echoed against the quiet pavement, steady, unhurried. The house loomed behind me, filled with boxes, filled with voices that weren't mine. But the night wrapped around me like armor once again, because they could carry in as many boxes as they pleased. But they couldn't box me out forever. The street was nearly silent when I reached the corner, only the faint hum of a street lamp and the occasional bark of a dog breaking the quiet. Behind me, the laughter still spilled faintly through the walls, muffled but sharp enough to cut. I didn't walk fast. I didn't need to. Each step I took felt deliberate, the rhythm steady, as though the ground itself understood what carried me forward. By the time I reached my apartment, the world had grown still. I closed the door behind me, leaning my back against it for a moment. My coat hung heavy with the night's chill, but what weighed on me more was the sight of that chair, those dishes, those boxes, my life, parceled out and repurposed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my small desk, the clock ticking louder with each hour that passed, a notebook open before me. Words spilled onto the page, not as plans at first, but as fragments of thought. Names, dates, memories only I carried. Then, slowly, the fragments began to form lines, and the lines built into a structure. Taking back what was mine wasn't just about walking into that house again. It had to be deliberate, precise. If they believed they could erase me, then I would remind them that every corner of that house still belonged to me, whether they acknowledged it or not. Morning broke, soft and grey. I dressed with care, pulling on dark clothes that allowed me to move quietly, unnoticed. I left without breakfast, only the notebook tucked under my arm, its pages filled with the outline of my intent. At the hardware store on Main, I wandered the aisles with quiet purpose. A set of sturdy gloves, a small crowbar, a flashlight thin enough to slip into my pocket. To the cashier, I was just another early customer, paying in cash, nodding politely. To me, each item was a key, a way back into the world that had been stolen from me. By afternoon, I found myself standing near the alley behind my old house. I kept my distance, watching. They had left the garage door cracked open, boxes stacked haphazardly inside. No one lingered there. The yard was quiet, the curtains drawn. Still, I didn't approach. Not yet. Timing mattered. I let the idea of it simmer inside me, refusing the urge to rush. That evening, I returned home, waiting until the city around me grew darker. I lit no lamps. Instead, I sat by the window, listening to the rain begin against the glass. Every drop tapped like a reminder, pulling me toward the inevitable. When the clock struck midnight, I rose. My gloves slid over my hands like second skin. The crowbar tucked neatly under my coat. The walk back felt different this time, not like an exile watching from the shadows, but like someone returning to claim their rightful ground. When I reached the garage, the air smelled of damp cardboard and motor oil. I crouched low, pushing gently against the door. It creaked faintly, then gave way, just enough for me to slip inside. My flashlight flicked on, its narrow beam cutting through the dark. And there they were, my dishes, stacked in a bin, my lamp leaning against a corner, the rocking chair standing silently as though waiting for me. I ran a gloved hand along its armrest, the wood smooth beneath my fingers. For a moment, I closed my eyes, hearing echoes of nights long gone, the steady creak as I rocked my son to sleep. My breath caught, but I steadied it. This wasn't about mourning. This was about reclaiming. One by one, I began. Not everything, just what mattered most. The lamp, the chair, a box of old photographs wedged beneath a stack of newer things. I moved with care, stacking them neatly by the door. Every item I touched felt like a heartbeat restored. Then I heard it, the faint creak of a floorboard above. I froze. Light dimmed instantly, breath shallow. Someone was awake. I waited, counting the seconds, until the sound stilled again. Only then did I continue, slower this time, deliberate. It wasn't greed that guided me. I didn't want all of it. Not yet. Just enough to remind myself, and them, that I hadn't vanished. That the house still carried me within it. When my arms could hold no more, I eased the garage door wider, slipping into the night with my things. The rain kissed my face, washing away the sweat from my brow. My chest tightened with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not sorrow, not anger, but a quiet satisfaction. A first step. Back in my apartment, I placed each piece with care. The lamp on the small table by the window, its light pooling warmly when I switched it on. The chair in the corner, creaking faintly when I lowered myself into it. The photographs spread across my desk, their edges curling but their memories sharp. For the first time in a long while, the room felt alive. Not whole, but no longer empty. And as I sat there, rocking gently in the chair that had once cradled more than just me, I whispered to the silence, "This is mine." But I knew it wasn't enough. What they carried in boxes might have looked like ownership, but true ownership lay in the history, the sweat, the years pressed into those walls. They could tape up cartons and label them fragile, but nothing they stacked or stored could erase me. I leaned forward, fingers brushing across the open notebook. Tonight had been the beginning, not the end. And as the rain fell steady outside, I wrote down one last sentence, anchoring the page with resolve. You cannot take what was never yours. The words sat there, firm and unshakable, like the foundation of the house itself. And in that moment, I knew I would return again. Because piece by piece, night by night, I would take back what was always mine.